I'm going. Good morning and welcome to Garden Lake Bible Church. Let's open up in a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for your word. We thank you for sending your son to die on the cross for our sins, Lord. Please be with this message today. Please speak through me. Please let us hear these words and apply them to our lives. In your name, amen. All right. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. The heading in the Berean Bible, generosity commended. In ESV, I think it was something like, Paul's guide to giving, godly giving, something like that, right? This chapter Paul is basically providing us with a model for godly Christian giving. This is not the only place in the Bible where God is talking about giving. But here Paul is just kind of giving us examples of giving and kind of a recommendation for giving, right? It's not necessarily a command. There's no commanding here, is because that would be like God taxing us, I guess. But this is what we should be doing. This is where our heart should be. So yeah, I think this is especially apropos, especially after chapter 7. In part, chapter 7 was telling us, we should be separating from worldly influence. And what greater worldly influence do we have in our lives than money, right? It directs so much of what we do. We're working to make money. We're trying to save our money and do things with our money. And so Paul here is kind of providing us with influence, providing us with a model of making that maybe not so important in our lives. So Paul is in chapter 8 basically just laying out to the Corinthians, the Corinthian church, and of course to all of us as well, right? How we should give our money, why we should give our money, how we should divide our resources to the Lord. All right, so I'm just going to read verses 1 through 5. I know I sound like a broken record. I probably say this every time. I expected to breeze through verses 1 through 5 and get to like the meatier part of the chapter is in the middle of the chapter. And I did not do that. So now, brothers, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the churches of Macedonia. In the terrible ordeal they suffered, their abundant joy and deep poverty overflowed into rich generosity. For I testify that they gave according to their ability, and even beyond it. Of their own accord, they earnestly pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the saints. And not only did they do as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us, because it was the will of God. All right, so again, Paul here in these first 5 verses is essentially providing to the Corinthians the example that the Macedonian church set. All right, so if you don't know where Macedonia is, Corinth is kind of in the southern part of Greece, and Macedonia is the northern territory of Greece. It encompasses the churches of Philippi, Berea, what else? I think I wrote it down. Oh, Thessalonica. They're kind of all part of the region that is Macedonia. All right, and so why is this such a good godly example of Christian giving? Why is Paul bothering to tell the Corinthian church about what the Macedonian church did? Oh yeah, I love an answer. Oh, there's the crux of the whole thing, right? They gave themselves to the Lord first. All right, I'll get to that. So I was just writing down a couple of things that were notable to me, and I basically put them into 2 major categories. And the first one was how the Macedonian church gave, right? So Paul says that they gave according to their ability. What does that mean? What does it mean to give according to your ability? Why is that important? Okay, within their means. So At this point in time, the Romans had taken a lot of the wealth of the Macedonian region through taxes or just doing things that Romans do, right? They take stuff. And so the Macedonians were poor. They were living in poverty at this time. And maybe the people in the church especially so. Right? So Paul says that they gave according to their ability. He's not talking about the fact that they gave an abundance of wealth. But if they had $50, they may have given half of that amount. I'm just making up that numbers, right? But they have given a large proportion of what they had to Paul. And by the way, the recipient of this money is, I believe, the people in the church in Jerusalem at the time. I think that's who Paul was collecting money from everybody for. Right? And so Paul says they gave according to their ability. This is kind of proportional giving. Right? They gave a proportion within their means, but a significant proportion of that. And I think, they weren't hindered by their poverty. When you don't have a whole lot, it's hard for you to fork up the cash to just give to somebody, right? It's not getting you anything. You're not paying bills. You're not receiving anything for the money that you're putting out. You are sacrificing a portion of what you have, what little that you have, so that somebody else who might be in a worse condition has more.
Circumstances define their generosity. Just because they lacked didn't mean that they didn't give generously.
Yeah.
Which is, again, you always think limits. Taxes are a percentage. People like to go to a percentage for giving. All right, but that shouldn't be the stop. Even the fact that they didn't have, they were still generous.
If you're worried about where your next meal's coming from, or whether you can afford the rent, it's hard to fork up a portion of your money, any portion of your money. Your heart really has to be in the right place. Yeah.
If somebody didn't have the money, would they have been able to get food, or because they were giving, would they be able to give meals or something like that in place?
I'm not sure. Remember, this has to make the trek from the churches in their regions. Got to be picked up by either Paul or, in this case, Titus to the Corinthian church, and then make their way to be distributed amongst the impoverished in Jerusalem. I'm going to guess that it definitely wasn't food. Probably, I would think that it would be just money, maybe some type of livestock, but I'm not sure.
They could give you livestock.
That's whoever you gave to had to take care of it and bring
Yeah.
it there. So probably cash.
I think it's just, I think it would just be money.
Good idea, but again, food would go to waste. The animals might run away.
Oh yeah, just from a strategic
It's a lot more
standpoint.
work for the person giving.
Yeah, and I think it was just Titus picking this money up. So, here, by the way, here's like 16 donkeys and a couple of goats. Good luck in your travels, right? But again, they weren't hindered by their poverty. And so I'm going to read this again. In the terrible ordeal they suffered, their abundant joy and deep poverty overflowed into rich generosity. For I testify that, number one, they gave according to their ability. And number two, what does it say? Beyond their ability. So not only did they give proportionally, but they gave above and beyond what you would expect someone to give. They gave a large portion of their earnings, wealth, whatever, to the Lord and to Paul. And I don't think God is saying here that, we need to go into debt in order to give to him. I don't think that's what he wants us to do, right? But the Macedonians they were happy. they gave with joy, right? They were happy to place themselves in an impoverished situation, right? They were willing to impoverish themselves and happy to do so, and probably trust that God would supply their needs. So there is a large issue here of, not issue, what's the word I'm looking for? My brain's not working right now. There is faith, there is trust that God would take care of their needs if they willingly, joyfully put him first.
But I think that's such a huge key.
Yeah.
Trust, faith. Have nothing, give something. Again, it doesn't say they gave you tons of money. It doesn't say how much, whatever percentage or whatever, you know.
They gave what they could. They gave more than they could.
You know, like, the example I always give is a friend of mine came with me a couple of years ago, wanted to give. His wife didn't want to, he wanted to. What should I give? So I told him, give $5. If it's not enough, give more. Give enough, make it 10. That's okay, make it 15. It's going to keep going up. If it hurts, give less. God doesn't want you to, so, you know what I mean? That's not the purpose here. You know, to find out what the amount is, I don't think that's a huge, it doesn't.
No, it's irrelevant.
When you go back to price time, with widows and stuff like that, she didn't give much, but you praised her. Because you gave from the heart, like you said, cheerfully.
Yeah.
What's a cheerful gift?
And again, I think it's where your heart is. If you're giving in a way that, like, all right, what is the least amount that I can give to God and it still be pleasing to God? I don't think you're coming at it from the right frame of mind, right? And they definitely were not. They were saying, what can we give? And they gave it joyfully. And then they said, oh, I'll talk about that in just a little bit, right? But they said, what can I give? And they gave it. And then they gave more. They gave above that, right? Right. And the second thing, I've already touched on this, that I kind of thought about was why they give, right? So how they gave proportionally, and then they gave above that. Why did they give that? Well, what was their motive here? What was their impetus behind their giving? Spread the gospel? Yeah, it's definitely not themselves. We usually give, like, when we make donations now, who do we give to? What do we give to? We give to church. People, like, what missionaries, like, why? We usually feel strongly about whatever it is that we're giving to. Somebody that you love has survived cancer. And a lot of times we make our donations to cancer funding and research and foundations and things like that. What's that? Yeah, there you go, right? But we donate to what we feel strongly about. So what did they feel strongly about? Well, number one, their giving was initiated by God's grace. It was right here in verse 1. Now, brothers, we want you to know about the grace of God, that the grace of God has given the churches of Macedonia. All right? Their giving was driven, motivated, initiated by God's grace. They were spiritually motivated to give. They didn't feel badly about the people. Well, maybe they did, right? But that wasn't their main impetus. Their main impetus was they were motivated by God's grace, right? That worked so strongly in their hearts. Verse 5, they gave because of their devotion to the Lord, right? Not only did they do as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us because it was the will of God. And there's their prime directive, their prime motivation. They gave themselves to the Lord. And I guess this example that Paul is providing to the people of Corinth is not necessarily one of you have to give, but where is your heart? Is your heart pointed at the Lord? Right? Are you willing to give your heart to the Lord give yourself first to the Lord. And I think we follow when our hearts are like that, when we're looking at the Lord and we are the Lord's now. Our money is the Lord's. Everything is the Lord's because he's given it all to us, right? We're more willing probably to sacrifice of ourselves and of our money and of our time and of our effort if we feel like it's already the Lord's. We're already the Lord's. Right? If we subject ourselves to his will. And if we do that, material things don't matter as much. I found a quote by Jim Elliot, and then maybe a little bit better one by Martin Luther. Jim Elliot said, "He is no fool." Does anybody know who Jim Elliot is? And he was a missionary to Ecuador, I think Ecuador? I think Ecuador. And I believe he died during his mission. He is no fool who gives away what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. I'll read it again. He is no fool who gives away what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Right? We have our eyes on a bigger prize than money, because all the money that you will ever make, it will be gone when you're gone. Right? Can't take it with you. And here's the one from Martin Luther. "I have held many things in my hands, and I have lost them all. But whatever I have placed in God's hands, I will always possess." All right? I think put these two together. This is a fantastic little narrative right here. Of Luther? "I have held many things in my hands, and I have lost them all. But whatever I have placed in God's hands, I will always possess." Right? Again, giving is a heart issue. I think I wrote that like 16 times in my notes all during this thing. The Macedonians were devoted to the Lord, and from their devotion came this prime example, right? This model of Christian giving. And lastly, their giving brought them joy. I think this is so neat, right? Even with the affliction that Paul was talking about, even under poverty that Paul mentioned, their abundance of joy was manifest in their giving. And that's just a neat place to be. They practically begged Paul here for the privilege of giving to the church in Jerusalem. In the terrible ordeal they suffered, their abundant joy and deep poverty overflowed into rich generosity. "For I testify that they gave according to their ability and even beyond it. Of their own accord, they earnestly pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in the service to the saints." Right? Paul did not have to beg them for money. He did not have to beg them to give.
First started coming here. He was here for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then went up to Aaron and said, do you guys like take money here?" Every place he's been before, they pass the plate in front of it, and you see what the person next to you is giving and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like you're teaching on a topic that I think our church does well, and so we had to explain to them, yeah, there's a dusty little box in the back. You can put money back there if the Lord leads you to do so. And that's, we have a box there because of these verses. We're not, passing the plate around guilt tripping people. So that's a little shout out to Brian Lake, something I like about our church.
Even though, I'll talk about this in a minute, I think Paul is kind of guilt tripping the Corinthians just a little bit. Maybe not guilt tripping, but I'm wondering if there's a little bit of sarcasm in some of these later verses. Because Paul is not a subtle person.
Verses like 1 to 5 that were actually 1 to 4, all of the greater words he uses, like great trial, abundance of joy, deep poverty, abounded, riches, beyond, freely, much. Like he used a lot of...
Better than you.
Yeah.
Where am I? Oh, I mean, that's my next question. Like, what do you think the people in the Corinth church, the Corinthian church. What do you think about what that they were thinking? What do you think their thoughts were when they were presented with this information? When they heard this?
Struggle to hear.
The same struggle we have with, like, we read our Bibles and we're like, all right, so what am I supposed to do? Right? And we jump right to that. And even now, like, I'm struggling, like, all right, don't go there yet. Like, what's the heart of what Paul's saying? And I'm seeing, like, it says they gave on their own accord. All right, so this isn't even like God necessarily giving us command to give, right? Where it's not under compulsion. But at the same time, convicted by the fact that they did give on their own accord. They're giving up to their ability or beyond their ability. And while it's not a command, it is convicting to say, okay, I need to get in on this. I need to be walking in this. And so I'd imagine, like, they have to have some type of stirring of, like,
I think he's
what am I supposed
hoping.
to be doing? Right, exactly. Yeah.
So at this point, this isn't the first time that Paul has asked the Corinthian church for money. He had done so previously, and he was planning on going himself to pick it up. But in light of what was happening between him and the Corinthian church, between the Corinthian, the books of the First and Second Corinthians, he sent Titus instead, right, to collect it. I think he's reminding them of their promise that they were going to give money. They said they were taking up a collection previously. I think it was 1 Corinthians 16, I think is when they said, they were taking up a collection for money to give to the church in Jerusalem. And I think Paul is saying it's time to do what you said you were going to do. And it's time to do it gladly. And it's time to do it unto the Lord, because this is what the Macedonians did. And they're doing it joyfully, and they're giving above their means. Right? So,
Tell the reading is, what's his passion? Is it that the people of Jerusalem needed the money, or that the Corinthian people needed to give money? And he balances the two so well, like, because his heart, he saw, he's seen firsthand and heard many times the problems of the needs there. But, the greater thing is also putting these people, calling them to task on it.
yeah, if you remember back in 1 Corinthians, one of the issues that the people in the Corinthian church had was they were doing things to bring glory to themselves. And one of the things that some of them were doing, where, I gave so much money, they named a church wing after me, right? And so they are definitely not as impoverished as the Macedonians were. And I'm wondering if Paul is reminding them of this in this chapter right here, subtly, maybe not so subtly.
I think so. Paul was not in a bad way a master manipulator. You know what I mean? I think today he would major in marketing, that kind of thing. So yes, just the idea that he brings up the poorness of the word poverty of the Macedonians, as opposed to Corinth is a very rich city.
Mm-hmm.
He brings that up, that even though they're in poverty, they're willing, they're around next to it, even though their circumstances are poor, you still want to help. Again, not saying how much, it doesn't mention amounts, but they gave more than we thought they would.
And we didn't have to ask them for it. We didn't have to put pressure on them. We didn't have to remind them. They did it of their own will through the grace of God. All right, so Macedonia, just a recap. Macedonians' giving was, number one, initiated by God's grace. It was generous. It transcended their affliction. It transcended their poverty. It was joyful. It was proportional. It was of their own accord. It was even greater than proportional, right? They weren't pushed into giving. They weren't reminded about giving. They did it of their own free will. They initiated their giving. And Paul is not so subtly telling the Corinthians about this. Yeah?
Every time you do something for someone to help them, or you give money, you get a good feeling inside of you. So I think God is rewarding you with that, because you feel good about yourself, not prideful, but it makes you feel good to do things for other people.
Absolutely. All right. So verses 6 through 8. So we urge Titus to help complete your act of grace, just as he had started it. But just as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we inspired in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. I am not making a demand, but I am testing the sincerity of your love in comparison to the earnest of others. This is where I think Paul might be a little bit sarcastic. Yeah, right? He's kind of laying it on, but I think he's saying, again, you have to remember that the Corinthian church has now kind of accepted Paul, right? There was a lot of animosity and there was a lot of tension between the Corinthian church and Paul in the earlier chapters of 2 Corinthians. And that has seemingly been resolved at this point. But still, the kind of Corinthian church was newly reconciled with Paul. And I'm just wondering, I don't know, I read this and I just pick up a little bit of sarcasm, maybe not sarcasm, but a little bit of hint of something here, right? So we urge Titus to, but just as you excel in everything, in faith and speech and knowledge and complete earnestness, this is kind of a new thing for the Corinthian church, this speech and knowledge and earnestness and the love we inspired in you, because he did not inspire love in the Corinthians a couple of chapters ago, right? This is kind of like a new thing. See that you also excel in this grace of giving. I'm not making a demand, but I'm testing the sincerity of love and compassion. All right? Complete this with, complete this grace, by the way. This is kind of like a turn of phrase that Paul uses for giving, complete this grace. And the fact that it's complete this grace, again, the grace was already promised by the Corinthian church. Paul is saying it's time to actually finish and give the money to Titus. He's sending Titus here to complete this act of grace, to receive the money that you said that you would give, right? I'm testing the sincerity of your promise. It's not a demand, though. He's making sure that they know that it's not a tax. I'm not demanding that you give. However, you said you were going to give. So maybe it's time to put up. Yeah. They like to brag about stuff. I think he's just motivating the Corinthians here. This is his way of motivating the Corinthians. He's saying, this is the example set by the Macedonians. Maybe it inspires you to do the same thing with joy, right? Because of God's grace, not because of what I'm saying. Verse 9, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. Oh, this is a big verse. I'm just reading this one verse here. All right, what does this mean? For your sakes. How was Christ rich and then became poor? Yeah, he became a man, right? He's rich. He was surrounded by the deity of heaven. He was surrounded by the glory, the majesty of heaven.
Well, say Philippians, like 2:8, where it says he emptied himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had it all, but he gave it up. Whether he got it back later on, it doesn't matter, but at that point, he emptied himself.
I had read that verse and I didn't write it down. Thanks for bringing it up. Because I would have totally forgot. Right? He became poor for your sakes. He became a man. And in doing so, he subjected himself to the humility of being a person, of no longer being he was completely God, but only God. I think this is the wealthiest example that Paul can think of, was Christ Jesus humbling himself and coming down from heaven. He shared in his heavenly Father's presence, surrounded by the exceeding majesty of heaven, and instead he came to earth. He became poor for our sakes. He divested himself of his majesty and his glory, for poverty, for suffering, for abuse, for the limitations of being human. He became poor for our sakes to take on our burdens on the cross in order to offer us mercy and hope, right? He became poor for our sakes by opening a path for us for salvation, right? For the transformative power of God's grace, right? He became poor for our sakes. And Paul is reminding the Corinthians that, like, here's the prime example, the best example of giving. Christ gave everything for you. Verses 10 through 12. And this is my opinion about what is helpful for you in this matter. Last year, you were the first not only to give, but even to have such a desire. Now finish the work so that you may complete it just as eagerly as you began, according to your means. For if the eagerness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not, or what he does not have. So apparently the Corinthians previously expressed it, well, not apparently, 1 Corinthians, they expressed a willingness to give previously, right? And now Paul, again, he wants them to actually do it. This reminded me of a Seinfeld episode. Anybody watch Seinfeld back in the day? Right? There's this episode where he tried to rent a car, and he went to the car rental, and he had made a reservation, and there was no car. And his whole bit was, anybody can take a reservation. You actually have to give the reservation, right? So this is what that reminded me of. They said they were going to give, and anybody can say that they're going to give. But it's now time to actually do the giving. If there's first a willing mind, I don't remember where I was going with this. Oh, when you have a willing mind, I think that is like a true mark of a generous heart. When you're willing to give, but again, you still have to come through. And again, he kind of makes this point of according to what one has and not according to what one doesn't have. This is proportional giving, right? How much can I give versus, how much am I able to give? Not kind of what can I give just to appease everyone, make Paul go away, leave me alone, or, get God off my back, get my, what can I do to just like make me feel good about myself? Now, Paul is saying, what can we give to the Lord? And if your heart is on the Lord, if your devotion is to the Lord, it's easy, it's joyful to give to the Lord. And that is all I have for today. First 12 verses. Any questions, comments? Every day. I mean, giving, he's talking specifically about money here. All right, so kind of, I actually read through John MacArthur's, he had a series of sermons on giving. And it wasn't just money, and it wasn't just from 2 Corinthians 8. It was, if you ever have time to read through a series of sermons by John MacArthur, it's a good little series of sermons. I think it's just 3 points. And I forget what my point was. Oh, how much to give? Yeah. Again, and he did not, like, he went into tithing as it was kind of described in the Old Testament, all the giving that was expected and sacrifice in the Old Testament. But his major, like 3 sermons, and his major point was, it is a heart issue. What can I give to the Lord proportionally, right? What can I give that I'm able to give without, impoverishing myself? You still have to pay your bills and do the things that you need to do and feed your families. But likewise, how can I give in a way that puts my trust that in the Lord that He will provide for me? And that was the major gist of all of that.
That is such a hard.
Yeah.
That's why I said start with $5 and just use it. So it hurts. When it hurts, you know what I mean? There is no amount of right person. I mean, like you said, you got your bills to pay, you got certain commitments that you have. You know, if you got $10,000 worth of commitments a month, and you only make $8, you're in big trouble. You know, so.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's not like I'm gonna give $100 to the Lord, he's gonna give me $100 back. I know they talk about that in the Old Testament, but you know, it doesn't work that way. I mean, maybe God might do that, but you get that strange check in the mail or whatever, but for the most part, you can't count on that. You know, that's the way it's gonna go. So, you know, I think, in my own personal life, I know I've always had a desire to give, okay? When I married Wendy, she brought that desire to fruition, that, you know, now's the time to give. You know, she sees the need, like, I don't know who, but someone left money in a box, we're doing the books now, so someone left some money in a box the other day to give to whoever needs it, right? And maybe I wouldn't have a clue who needs it, you know what I mean? We used to have the Deacons Fund where we gave money to people in the community, but we never gave money to people in the community, but paid their bills or groceries or whatever, you know what I mean? But it's hard for me to see the need. I don't know what it is, it just is. She sees the need, and, you know, we try to help out, whatever, so yeah. So to answer Andy's question, I couldn't tell you how much to give. Again, everyone makes a certain, you know, different amounts. Everyone has different bills according to that. You know, maybe someone just bought a new car and all of a sudden got saved and wants to get money.
And there's different forms of giving.
Yeah.
There's your time. There's your effort.
Yeah, but I think it's strictly cash.
Yeah.
Money.